The NHL All-Star break has come to an end and the NHL regular season is ready to resume. We should have a lot more trade activity as we get into the last month before the NHL trade deadline. Today we're looking at trade rumors around players like Jake Kessel. Also, the Boston Bruins going to be in on one of the defensemen in Calgary, notably Noah Hanifin. What's going on with Chris Tanev? Obviously, we have other moves going on in Calgary, including a waiver claim, which suggests we could see a trade on the blue line here very soon. We do have a grievance coming regarding Corey Perry in the Chicago Blackhawks. Could Phil Kessel return to the Vancouver Canucks? And we have all kinds of other roster moves and a few signings as well coming out of the All-Star break. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today. It's the final day before the NHL regular season resumes. The All-Star break's now concluded. Teams were back to having skates and practices here today, and NHL regular season games resume tomorrow. We did have news from the NHL waiver wire that I wanted to first discuss. The Calgary Flames claimed defenseman Braden Paschal on waivers from the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously, that makes us wonder if they're going to be needing him soon, because they're obviously likely to move at least one, maybe two more defensemen. Obviously, they have some other things going on with the team as well. He could play sooner than that, but still, at the end of the day, we know that moves are likely coming sooner than later. I know the latest intel on Chris Tanev was there was lots of discussions, lots of interest, and that there was some belief late last week that trade could be coming pretty much any time. Doesn't mean it's going to. It could drag on and take a little bit longer to materialize. But at this point, we wouldn't be surprised at all if we found out anytime, tonight, tomorrow, the next day, that a deal is done. We know there's still lots of teams that have been interested. It seems unlikely, but I wouldn't say it's impossible that the Vancouver Canucks do try to get him still. He was in discussions, or involved in the discussions in the Elias Lindholm trade. So obviously they had interest to bring him back, but it was going to be too costly to get him and Lindholm out of Calgary. The Canucks would have to forfeit, or well, not forfeit, but move on from another first rounder likely, or at least a second rounder and another good prospect. They just may not want to do that. As much as they want the player, they've paid out a lot to get Lindholm, and they may not go down that road. But we know the other teams like the Leafs and the Sens have been heavily mentioned regarding Tanev, and there's definitely, like I said, some of the American teams as well, between teams in the Metropolitan especially. I know the Devils would like to add if they can, but they may wait to see where they're at in the standings. And there's other teams too that are certainly looking to make some adjustments and some improvements here. So Tanev is going to be a hot commodity. I have no doubt they'll get the asking price they want, which is rumored to be at the very least a second round pick and a prospect. So we'll see where that goes, but I do expect a Tanev trade to be probably one of the next ones we see this week, but we'll see where things go on that front. All kinds of other roster moves as well, as I mentioned. Obviously, a lot of teams sent players down to the minors and things like that to get players that are not necessarily established NHLers are still needing some time to get them AHL time while the All-Star break was going on. Of course, some teams had their bye weeks as well, so they had a few other extended days off. So here's a long list of things that we've changed with rosters since the All-Star break's coming to a conclusion here today. The Rangers recalled Jake Leschyshyn and Connor Mackey. It's also believed that Ryan Lindgren's ready to return. The Oilers recalled Dylan Holloway. The Leafs are going to be without David Kampf. Apparently, in their last game before the break, he did suffer an injury. Doesn't sound like it was too serious, but they basically were hoping it would kind of settle down and he would be ready to keep playing when the break was over, but it's not quite there. So he is going to end up missing some time. So we will see an adjustment into the forward group of the Leafs. It sounds like Mark Scheifele is ready to return for the Winnipeg Jets. The Flames as well have recalled Jacob Pelletier, Kevin Rooney, and Cole Schwindt as well. AJ Greer has been placed on injured reserve. And the Buffalo Sabres today announced that defenseman Mattias Samuelsson had the required season-ending surgery. So he's done for the season. Obviously, between the Jack Quinn injury that happened a short time ago and now Samuelsson, I know the Sabres, for the most part, you could say are probably, they're not really in a spot between them and Ottawa to get into the playoffs. If you look at the bottom of that Atlantic Division, certainly math is not in favor or the friend to any of those teams. But when you're the Sabres and you see a couple of big blows like that, then clearly it's that much more of a blow to say that it's going to be that much more challenging and difficult because you're without some of your important players. So unfortunate news there in Buffalo. As I said, we also had a couple signings today. The Montreal Canadiens announced that they've signed Brandon Gignac to a 2-year, 2-way contract. He was on an American Hockey League deal with Laval in the AHL and doing extremely well. He had put up 38 points in 41 games, was one of the league's top scorers, especially on a point per game basis. And he gets rewarded after the Sean Monahan trade that creates some room on the roster, and he gets a NHL contract, so he can be recalled. I believe he's with the Habs now. I know the Habs also recalled Lucas Condotta as well. Obviously, between moving Monahan and dealing with some injuries, they do have more of an opportunity here to get some guys some looks. So that's obviously a good opportunity for him after an impressive first half of the year in the American Hockey League. The Pittsburgh Penguins signed Jesse Puljujarvi. That's been a deal that we suspected might happen. He was working with their American Hockey League team. I believe it was on a tryout basis, or I'm not sure if he actually signed an amateur contract. I believe it was just a tryout. But he now gets rewarded with a 2-year NHL contract at $800,000. So he had put up 9 points in 13 games in the American Hockey League, obviously known as more of a pretty solid defensive metric kind of guy, can chip in offensively, but he's not the offensive player a lot of people thought that he was going to develop into when he was first drafted in the top 5 of his draft class. But ultimately, I think after having some health issues corrected and having a chance to get some time away, he's obviously shown that I think that the hip issue he was dealing with was a big problem for him. And now that he's had that corrected and has had a chance to heal and recover and play in the minors for a while, he seems to be doing a lot better. So, whether or not he finds that form and gets anywhere close to being the player he was when he was drafted or expected to be is hard to say and probably doubtful. But at the very least, he should be able to become a regular NHL bottom 6 forward. So we'll see what the Penguins can do here with him at 2 years, at $800K. So pretty low risk signing. If things don't work out, at least it's something that can be buried in the minors and it's not a long-term deal. So hopefully Jesse Puljujarvi can make the most of this opportunity at his second chance, or I guess third chance really in a sense, at the NHL. He already had left the Oilers, was gone for a while and then came back. This is like his second time returning, his third go at it. So hopefully this time it sticks. We also learned something I didn't talk about over the weekend in other videos, but on Friday with the Gary Bettman, Bill Daly press conference when at the All-Star festivities, when they covered a lot of important topics, including making announcements on the international updates like the World Cup and Olympic participation. Obviously made comments on the 2018 World Juniors, charges that are coming and all that kind of stuff. They talked about a lot of things, but one of the things they did talk about that I didn't really cover in my analysis was the Corey Perry situation with Chicago. Gary Bettman did confirm that they did give an extension to when a grievance could be filed on behalf of Corey Perry through the NHLPA, and that it is coming. Gary Bettman confirmed 100% that Perry's contract will be grieved, that Perry himself does not feel that he was terminated appropriately, and that they're going to be going after the Blackhawks for compensation. So essentially what will likely come from this is they could either end up settling perhaps, or they could go to all the way and do a ruling, essentially go to a third-party arbitrator. Bettman himself also said he didn't have any issue with what the Blackhawks did. So I don't think the league or himself would be really in favor of thinking that a grievance is going to be, won. But at the same time, I think that personally, I'm not sure that there really is grounds there based on what we do know. But the problem is that we don't know a lot, which makes it complicated to really have a firm opinion. But Perry himself, the PA, they don't want to have some kind of precedent set that players can be terminated for these types of things. I would think, based on what was rumored to have happened, that would be more of a case of him being put into player assistance program and seeking some help to kind of help get over, the issues he was obviously dealing with, and, whatever he did that was inappropriate. So anyways, Corey Perry grievance is coming for sure. We'll have to likely hear more about that in the coming weeks as things move forward. On the trade section of the video, we certainly have a variety of players to take a look at. After seeing some of the top centers moved, obviously we saw Lindholm and Monahan go. You're going to see some other names pop up a lot more on the trade rumor mill, and they're not necessarily huge names or big, point contributors. They're more of a middle or bottom six centers because there's not a ton of UFA centermen on the market right now. But, obviously Adam Henrique's one of the bigger names to keep an eye on. Nick Dowd in Washington apparently is getting a lot of interest from various teams. You're also going to hear that he's not a center, but Pat Maroon, a veteran player with Minnesota with Stanley Cups on his resume, certainly going to be a guy. Even Zach Bogosian in Minnesota as well. A couple of depth players that don't make a lot of money. They wouldn't be expensive to acquire from a trade perspective, and they bring that valuable experience of winning cups. So, a lot of teams really value that and can, especially if they're a team that doesn't have that experience and don't have many guys around that have won before, they could be some, low-key pickups that are not overly expensive, but might bring you a lot of intangibles and things off the ice that can go a long way to help on your team. So those are names you're definitely going to hear more about as well. Jake Guentzel is obviously right near the top of the list as well. We don't know what direction the Penguins are going in yet. He remains unsigned. Obviously, Kyle Dubas has some big decisions to make on, do the Penguins kind of go into a rebuild, a retool? Do they continue to try to push here? I think he's going to let the on-ice play kind of take care of itself over the next couple of weeks and see where things go. The Penguins are in the mix, but they far from a guarantee to get into the playoffs, and it's not going to be easy. But if they can have, they don't need to go on a run like some teams would, like I said before, like an Ottawa or a Buffalo, but they do need to get a good little win streak going to make sure that it's more of an opportunity. That we can say with certainty. But Jake Guentzel is going to be a guy who's going to drive a big return if he is moved. And he's also going to get a big contract if and when he is signed, whether it be ahead of this deadline or into the summertime. Guentzel's a proven 30 to 40 goal guy with great playoff stats. He's won. He's been there. He's, been Crosby's winger for a long time. I do think, like I said before, that Crosby's going to have some say in this because ultimately he's not going to want his guys to go. I mean, he obviously was involved with these, obviously didn't make the decisions, but I'm sure they valued his opinion greatly, keeping Malkin and Letang around, and Guentzel's probably going to be one of those guys too. There was talk from Nick Kyprios of Sportsnet on his radio show with Justin Bourne, and he was saying that he had heard that Guentzel was offered a 6-year, $50 million deal to stay in Pittsburgh, which will give him a cap hit of about $8.3 million. Pittsburgh media have chimed in and commented on this, saying that if that's the case, they wouldn't think that he would reject it because that's a lot of money. And yes, he might get a little bit more in the open market, but not a lot. And he'd be able to stay in Pittsburgh where he's played his whole career and obviously enjoys it and likes it. And, they would suspect that would be amicable to get a deal done, but it's not done. So that's why Pittsburgh media is kind of wondering if how much truth there is to that. From what we had heard before, it sounded like there really wasn't a whole lot of talks going on. Just because there wasn't a lot of talks doesn't mean Dubas and his team wouldn't have gotten a little bit aggressive and said, we're going to go to them with an offer and see what they say, even though we haven't really negotiated a lot. I don't think that's really what happened, though, because it's based on our knowledge of how a lot of these negotiations go. I just don't see that being the case. I know Guentzel's agent had made it clear that they are perfectly willing to wait and play this season out. They understand that if they're unsigned, there's a good chance they could get traded. They know that, and they're willing to accept that. His agent has publicly stated that before. So I don't really think that we're going to get a decision on Guentzel and the Penguins. I would be surprised if he is signed, but, without them getting into the playoffs for sure, it just seems like a risky move. I mean, Guentzel himself is not a risky player. He's young enough that it would put him to his mid to late 30s, depending on the term. But, at the same time, this team does it really need and can it afford another long-term deal on a player that's going to be going into his 30s on a team that hasn't been really overly successful the last few years? It could be a real case of really pushing the opinion and thought that this team needs more change, and that maybe some of the moves they already made, bringing in Karlsson, signing Malkin, maybe those moves shouldn't have been done because it's not working out to the degree that they were hoping for. So we'll see. But Jake Kessel is going to be one of the big names to watch here in the next few weeks for sure. The Boston Bruins are going to be another team to watch. There is reported interest in defenseman Noah Hanifin of the Calgary Flames. They were heavily involved right up till the end on Elias Lindholm. But it sounds like, according to Elliot Friedman, one of the big things that held the Bruins back from really being more of an aggressive finalist, you could say, or getting more of a chance to land a player, was the fact that they didn't want to pay the prices that the Canucks were willing to without being able to talk contract extension. Vancouver took that and said, we'll deal with it later. Boston wanted that security. Like we saw what they did with Hampus Lindholm. They like to do these kinds of deals, bring players in and then extend them. They don't always, I guess historically speaking, they have done lots of rentals, but they went through a long stretch before where they did too many rentals and picks and prospects kind of got put to the wayside. And then, more recently, we've seen them kind of do acquisitions, not always, because they obviously did it last year as well, but trying to keep some of these guys. And after losing Orlov last year and Hathaway, they get those guys from Washington and Bertuzzi. They brought in a lot of guys last year and it didn't work out and they all end up leaving. You really can't have that happen a second year. So to bring in a guy like Lindholm needed an extension. They want to bring Hanifin in, which I know is a player they've had interest in since he was drafted. They're going to need an extension. So we're going to have to see, but there is definite interest there on that front. It's believed, according to NHL reporters, that the Flames would really like a response or an answer from Hanifin one way or another. Is he willing to sign or not? Pretty much, shortly after the All-Star break, so they can start either getting this contract finalized to keep him or to have more time to negotiate a trade to move him on. So we'll see where that goes. And Phil Kessel, could he return and could he end up in Vancouver? There's been lots of reports in the last number of weeks that he still very much wants to play, then that he very much is looking for a team still, and is kind of, I guess you could say a little surprised by many that he's not signed as of yet. He's got lots of experience, not quite the player he used to be, but still a guy who can contribute. There is some speculation there could be mutual interest between he and the Vancouver Canucks. There was comments from head coach Rick Tocchet saying that Phil absolutely has value and he can absolutely 100% still play. We know that Rick Tocchet would probably be his preferred coach. He obviously has a great connection there. Phil Kessel and Rick Tocchet were quite a duo in Pittsburgh. Rick, when he was an assistant coach there, kept Kessel happy when he was, sometimes having issues with other things going on. He's a difficult guy to coach by all accounts. And then, of course, he followed him to Arizona. And, he's now the coach in Vancouver. So clearly there's a connection there. Obviously, the management group, all from Pittsburgh, so they know this guy well. They know what he brings on and off the ice. It'd be a cheap contract for the rest of the year. If they can make it work, I would not be surprised to see the Canucks sign Phil Kessel. I don't think it would be any kind of serious money, and I don't think it would be more than just the rest of the season. But if he's on an NHL roster before the NHL trade deadline, then he's eligible to play the rest of the year and playoffs. So we'll see, but that might be where he lands, and we could see that in the next couple of weeks as well. We'll have to wait and see where that goes. That way they can actually continue to add to their group here without giving up more assets. But they still might try to add on the blue line as well. I just don't know about Tanev. I think it might be more of a depth option that's maybe a little cheaper because they gave up a lot to get Lindholm. But let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors. Of course, tomorrow is going to be a huge day in the NHL. Tomorrow is the press conference from the London Police Force. Going to give us a lot more updates and information on the World Junior players that are facing charges for sexual assault. Obviously, we've learned a lot through what investigative journalist Rick Westhead and Robin Doolittle of the Globe and Mail have been able to dig up over the past week. But will we learn more? It's still going to be a big day. We should expect more of an official response from the NHL as well. And like I said, we'll be covering that quite closely tomorrow afternoon, so stay tuned for that. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on all their other content updates here in the coming days and weeks ahead as we get closer to the deadline. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.